We're live.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Certification Advisory Committee on September 1st, 2020 at 9:33 a.m. Typically at this time, we would be asking for the executive director's report, but I understand we don't have one for this meeting. The Certification Advisory Committee would like to welcome Mr. Tom Tyree, the Yuma County Superintendent of Schools. And he's fulfilling that position, and it was vacant, and we welcome you, Tom. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. We have a great committee here. We do amazing work, and your input is absolutely valued as a county superintendent. Our next item on the agenda is the call to the public. There have been no requests to speak at this meeting, and I understand there's been no written input. Is that correct, Petra?
Madam Chair, that's correct. Can we also do the roll call?
Excuse me. Thank you for the reminder.
Yeah.
Do the roll call, please.
No problem. Member Tabo? And I'll go slowly here, members, so that you can unmute yourself. And I think I already have an idea of who's here. So Member Tabo doesn't sound like or look like she's here. And I think she told us she wouldn't be here till 10:30 at the earliest. So Member Farah?
Present.
Member Dumler?
Here.
Member Hendrickson?
Present.
Member Janice Pinnell? Superintendent Tyree?
Here.
Member Lighting? Member Garcia?
Here.
Superintendent Weber?
Here.
Member Horn? Superintendent Corporich?
Present.
Member Spear?
Here.
And Chair Peasley. And actually, I also just saw Member Janice Pinnell just joined us too as well. So you do have a quorum.
Okay. Thank you. And I'd also like to welcome another new member to the committee is Member Angel Janice Pinnell. Thank you, Dr. Pinnell, for joining us on this committee as the member of the public. All right, we are now down to our third actual item on the agenda, which is the presentation, discussion, and possible action to recommend opening proposed rule R72615.01 as special education endorsements for deaf and hard of hearing and visually impaired endorsements. So we turn this meeting now over to Mr. Bruce Duplanty. Bruce, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I would love to, or the committees, right? Good morning. I'd like to give a little overview of what you have before you and a little background. As we worked to adopt the endorsements for mild, moderate, and moderate severe, some interest arose around exploring the endorsement option for the deaf and hard of hearing and the visually impaired. And so that work started with an external stakeholder, the Arizona School for the Deaf and Blind, State School for the Deaf and Blind, and I know Oren's on this call as well. And so we started to work through that in December of 2019. And originally, he helped facilitate a survey of the field of interest and need, as well as what those endorsements might look like. Following that, we pulled in the certification area, as well as the ESS area and the ADE, state board staff, and the Arizona State School for Deaf and Blind, working with Oren and his staff as well, and started to brainstorm and work through what requirements would look like for those endorsements. We went through several rounds of review and draft and modification. And then about a month ago, we surveyed the field again with the drafts that you have in front of you. And so I'll talk through those survey results as well in just a minute. And then we asked for this to be put on a CAC meeting, and here we are. So if I can go on to the survey results, and then I'll talk about the requirements if that's an order that works for you. I can go either way. So the survey results, we sent it out to a certification mail list that included over about 900 individuals, as well as ESS sent it out to Exceptional Student Services. Try to get away from the acronyms here. Exceptional Student Services sent it out to their email list that included special education teachers, directors, administrators, and also included the special education supervisors, school leadership principals, and the like. It included LEAs such as the school district's charter schools, obviously the Arizona State School for the Deaf and Blind, as well as private schools and private agencies who typically may help provide services in the special ed realm. And as you look through your survey, I'm going to kind of jump down. We went to if we focus on the visually impaired, the way the survey worked is we asked if you employ or work with a certain type of teacher. So visually impaired teacher is the first question. And if the respondent said yes, then we asked them to kind of weigh in on the requirements that were provided. And if they, in general, supported it. Go ahead.
Excuse me, Bruce, are you sharing your screen?
I am not. I believe that this document was put in your materials as well.
All right, thank you.
It's the survey report proposed visually impaired and deaf of hard of hearing endorsement.
And Madam Chair and members, as is Melissa is the one who's sharing her screen right now, and that's Simbly that's being shown. And I just put the link in the chat box for those who want to have access to that, which has the real document that Bruce is referring to, as well as the survey results. And I should also just mention for the committee, be careful about using the chat, because that might be, we'll put things in there if there are technical issues or what have you, but just be careful about having discussions in the chat, because that might be violating open meeting law. But just want to put that out there.
Thank you very much.
If you open the PDF, which is the survey summary, and I'm kind of jumping to past question 3, I'm moving to question 5. Question 4 really asked you, is there a shortage? And in both cases, for both endorsements, basically folks identified a shortage of teachers or the availability of certified teachers in these areas. So question 5 is kind of the overall, do you support this endorsement or do you not support this endorsement? And 62% did designate that they did support this endorsement. That's 62% of the people who identified that they work with or employ the visually impaired educators. And then when we looked down at question 6, we asked, do you fully support it with no changes? In other words, you agree with the draft language, or do you support with suggested changes? And then again, I don't support or don't have an opinion. And so we can see that 62% support the visually impaired endorsement, 41% support as is, and about around 25% with some changes. And then at question 7, we've summarized the comments of folks that support with suggested changes or the open-ended responses of some feedback. And so 7 respondents out of those wanted to increase the requirements that are compared to the draft. 4 respondents wanted to decrease. And you can see there, eliminate the Braille proficiency requirement and all the way to no coursework. And then 6 just opposed it for the following reasons. And it's lowering the standards is the first one, and the second one was the root cause issues of the teachers being unavailable in pay and culture and climate. And then if we move on to the deaf and hard of hearing survey results, and again, jumping down to question 10 is the shortage. They all identify shortage in this area. Question 11 is just overall support for the endorsement language or the endorsement as it is, as the draft states, and 64% identify that they support. The next question kind of asked them to drill in a little bit. 37% support as is, and 29% support with some changes. And again, same kind of format. Some 7 respondents would like to see an increase in the requirements around the Arizona Sign Language deficiency, a mentorship requirement, and practicum hours. 3 respondents would like to see a decrease in the requirements. It looks like they would like an exam or removing the ASL requirement. And 8 respondents were opposed, and again, similar to the visually impaired, lowered the standard. They believe it's lowering the standards for those teachers, as well as doesn't address the root cause of why we're short teachers in these areas. And then question 14, just as a side note, is just any other feedback. And there's a summary, and there's a discussion in both of these around kind of 2 issues. And so if I can go to the requirements, I'll kind of point out where those kind of debates or conversations are happening. If you go to the requirement documents, I'll start kind of in the opposite order of the survey and go with the deaf and hard of hearing endorsement language. And again, both of these are similarly modeled after the earlier special education endorsements that were adopted. And it requires somebody to qualify for this. It requires them to have a standard professional teaching certificate. And those are listed under D1 in this case for the deaf and hard of hearing, excuse me, D2. D1 kind of lets the person know if they get this endorsement, what they're allowed to do. It really covers birth through grade 12, so it covers the entire span of the K-12, and then it identifies the audience of or the type of students they'll be dealing with, which is the deaf and hard of hearing. So the requirements are listed under D2. D2A says standard professional teaching certificates and lists all the ones that would be appropriate to add this endorsement to. Like the other endorsements we've adopted earlier, this would require 3 years of full-time teaching experience. And so the idea behind these endorsements is somebody's already been through an ed prep program, been through student teaching, and is qualified for a standard professional in another area, has taught for at least 3 years, understands the climate and culture of the school, and then can do additional coursework, potentially without going through another major, but just adding coursework to then be able to qualify. But an important component is the 3 years of full-time teaching. And then like the others, this breaks down into some coursework delineated in C and D. C is 6 semester hours to include all of the following, and it's the methods of students with disabilities, behavior management, and use of instructional assistive technologies in the classroom. Kind of some general special education courses, if I can kind of generalize that way, and then others can weigh in and correct me. And then D is 15 semester hours of courses in the deaf and hard of hearing to include all of the following. And I know that Mary and Oren can speak to the importance of these and why those decisions were made. E is the practicum, supervised practicum requirement. And then F is the American Sign Language that was referred to in some of the survey results, as well as I know we've had some discussions as we were drafting around this. And on 3, there's probably a little bit of an artifact there that says see notes and email. So sorry that made it into the rule language, but I will kind of point out at this point that the American Sign Language is not required for the regular full certificate. It's not a requirement of that full certificate. There was a lot of conversation and debate around having this and being important as part of the endorsement. Part of the endorsement path. There's a disagreement in the survey, to be honest, and you can see that in their comments. So the current proposal is a compromise between some ASL experience and demonstrating full proficiency. So I'd just like to highlight that at this point. Do you want me to stop there, or do you want me to present the visually impaired as well, which is very similar?
Let's see if we have any questions from committee members on the deaf hard of hearing endorsement. I want to thank you, Bruce. Oren and Mary and your group for listening, taking the feedback, listening, and making some what the field considers some very important adjustments. So those are my comments. Is there anybody else on the committee?
I have a question. As a new member of the committee, the results that you've or the responses you receive back, is that pretty consistent with what you typically see when you put something out like this in terms of approvals or their thoughts about it?
Madam Chair and members, Member Tyree, that was it. This is kind of in alignment with the same survey or similar survey that we did for the other endorsements, the special education endorsements we did prior. It's a fairly typical response rate, as well as the approval rating is very similar to what we had on the prior endorsements we approved.
Thank you. Any other questions from members? Okay, let's go on then. Thank you. Let's go on to the next one.
Right.
Visually
So
impaired endorsement.
Madam Chair and members, the visually impaired endorsement, a very similar layout to what you just looked at and I just walked you through. E1 kind of designates what they can do with the endorsement. Again, full coverage for actually pre-K-12 is both of them. And then E2 and A requires the standard secondary certificate. And so by and large, those folks have a full program under their belt, student teaching practicums, a full ed prep program most of the time for those certificates. And then 2B requires, again, 3 years of full-time teaching. So the thought is, again, giving you somebody who's got full training and has some experience in the school, understands the culture and climate. They can go get additional coursework rather than getting a whole degree, possibly, in this area and qualify. And then like the other certificate, 2C, 6 semester hours of special education courses, and they're the same as in the other endorsement. And then 2D is where the specialization comes in, and that delineates specific coursework in the visually impaired realm that applicants applying for this endorsement must have. 2E is the 45 clock hours of supervised practicum. And then 2F is proficiency in Braille. And then we list some possible options for verifying that proficiency. Again, this is probably a point of discussion for this. You saw it in the survey results as well. Some weighing in. Maura works in the certification. She's the rules and procedures coordinator. She's in the room with me. We were preparing for this meeting today, and we did come across a state statute that does proficiency and in fact delineates how that proficiency should be measured. So we probably have a little bit of technical cleanup or a technical review that needs to happen in this section based on that statute. But I think at this point with I wrote it down, ARS 15214A5 does require Braille proficiency. And so, and this is in the regular full certificate as well, the same requirement. So again, the language, we probably need to do a little bit of a cleanup as in terms of how we're gonna measure that proficiency. We need to review the statute. But we could certainly do that if the rule were to be opened and clean that up and roll that back out. Another thing I'd like to point out about both of these endorsements, we are not proposing at this time a provisional route. The other endorsements, when the CAC discussed it, they wanted a provisional route to kind of have a subset of the requirements to qualify for the endorsement. The person could teach on it for a while, get the other requirements, and then convert the endorsement to a full endorsement. We believe that due to the nature of the specialization and the rigorous training that needs to go in to obtain that specialization of these two areas, that we're not recommending a provisional route. But ultimately that is turned over to you. So that's my preparation and presentation. Certainly happy to answer questions. And I don't know how we want to loop in Mary and Oren to speak about maybe some of those, the Ds or the other areas, the D requirement or the other areas, or other feedback on these endorsements. Back in your hands.
Lauren?
Hi, this is Mary Keeney with
Or Mary?
Education. I think one thing I would probably say is in regard to both of the endorsements, we're probably not going to reach agreement, like complete agreement, on the issue of sign language. It looks like the Braille is going to be a little bit easier sell because it's in statute, but I think Oren can speak to this, that we haven't reached agreement on issues related to sign language in several centuries now. So maybe something we'll have to just have a consensus that most people would find reasonable. Oren?
Hello, so this is Oren Katrov with the Arizona State Schools for the Deaf and Blind, and I would agree. When you look at Braille and ASL, not every student who is deaf and hard of hearing or every student who is blind or has a visual impairment will need those. It depends on the degree of the disability. So, you know, especially when it comes to ASL, for students who have an implant and are taking the speaking and listening route, they may not need ASL. But for a significant amount of people who do have a hearing disability, ASL will be something that they can at least, I don't want to say rely on or fall back on, but it is something that they can fall back on. You also go into kind of a cultural and political route, in that the deaf community do see themselves as a community to where ASL is their language. It's a language which should be appreciated and that people should learn. And so by saying it's not necessary for people who are deaf and hard of hearing, you're going to get in a little bit of a cultural and political squeeze there. The way I see it is that if a teacher learns Braille or if a teacher learns ASL, then they have those skills. So if a district does end up having a child come in who is going to be relying on ASL or is going to need Braille instruction, you have a certified person or an endorsed person in this case in the district who has the skill set to do it. So, you know, it's one of those skills where even if the teacher doesn't have to use it in the short term, the fact that they have it might help the district in a long term. In Arizona, we have a mobile population. So saying that, you know, Page Unified doesn't have a student who needs Braille right now, therefore the teacher doesn't need to know it, that could change in a year or 2 years. So, you know, why not prepare teachers to truly be able to work with any child who has a VI and HI issue. That's my take on it.
Thank you, Oren. And including these requirements for some level of proficiency in ASL and Braille meets the significant concerns of the special education directors in the community, because we are the ones who are charged with providing free, appropriate public education that meets the students' needs. And as we have families that choose Braille and or American Sign Language for their children, we're responsible for providing that. And while we could say, oh, well, it's up to the districts to hire teachers who have the appropriate credentials, given the scarcity of teachers of the hearing impaired and teachers of vision impaired students, we don't have that luxury of deciding and scrutinizing credentials to see whether or not this person is going to be someone that we can use in the future, either currently or in the future with future children. So the field absolutely thanks you very much for the hard work that you, Aaron, and your staff have put in to come up with this endorsement. And special education directors do not have any further questions about the endorsement as we work through this over time.
Kim, sorry, this is Mary Keeney. I just wanted to clarify that my point was not whether or not ASL proficiency should be included, but that we wouldn't agree on a measure or a level that was the baseline.
No, I understood that. I understood that, Mary, and in the field we understand that as well. It's just that that was included where there had been at one point in time in the past, there was discussion that it may not be necessary. So I'm referring to a quite historical concern on this one. So thank you.
Thanks for that.
Madam Chair, if I can jump in here real quick, just well, one, probably something I should have done earlier, which is do some maybe reintroduction of folks. Bruce Duplanty is with the Department of Education. Well, he used to be the head of the certification unit, has since gotten a couple promotions, but for our purposes, associated with the certification team at the Department of Education. Oren is with, as he mentioned, as he introduced himself, with Schools for the Deaf and Blind. Mary Keeney is with Exceptional Student Services at the Department of Education, and I am with board staff, and then the remaining folks are of course your fellow members. I also would probably just ask, especially Mary, Oren, and Bruce, because you're not members of the committee, if you want to chime in on something, to do your best to kind of flag either Chair Peasley down or myself down so that you could be recognized. Just frankly, the committee members should probably be doing that too, but it's a little bit more appropriate if they do it versus us staffers, us lonely staffers. And then the only other thing, Madam Chair, I wanted to point out was I think Member Farah was raising her hand earlier and wanted to either ask a question or raise a point or something. So I just want to alert that for you.
Thank you, Member Farah.
Thank you. Yes, I found the icon for the raise your hand. So Catcher, thanks for catching that. I have a question that's separate from the certification that you were just talking about, and that's under the courses. Was there discussion regarding, I'm thinking of the compliance issues for special education that can sometimes get us, into a bind if IEPs aren't written correctly, progress notes, deadlines aren't met. And I didn't see that in the courses, but would that be covered under the supervision? I just worry about that part as an administrator.
That could be perhaps Oren address that.
Just give me a second. I'm taking a look over.
And thank you, Member Farah, for bringing that up, because that does come close to now talking about those teachers who have a standard professional early childhood, elementary, middle, or secondary certificate. Those who already have a standard special education teaching certificate have all those skills. The question would then fall on those other certificates. Do they have those skills to do that?
So this is Oren, and in looking it over, I think I would have to agree that it, if it was not put within the semester hours of methods of teaching students with disabilities, if the IEP wasn't brought up there, then you would, and it would be an assumption, I'm the first one to admit it, you would assume that would happen within the supervised practicum, that's where that would fall, to truly understand more about special education law, policy, IEP teams. but it's not explicit. I would agree with you on that.
Among my colleagues, we had discussed that this would mean if a general education teacher got one of these endorsements, that they would be functioning and operating much like our occupational therapists and physical therapists do. They would be writing present levels of performance. They would be writing the goals and providing the services, but they would not be case managers for the IEP. That responsibility would have to fall then on the a special education teacher at school to actually do that work. Because there's not the coursework here to train a general ed teacher and being able to understand FAPE, free appropriate public education, and all in the compliance requirements of an IEP. They would be service providers. Oren, Mary, is that how you had seen that as well? And I think we did have some talk about this. We did have some discussion about this at another meeting, maybe about a year and a half or so ago.
This is Mary Keeney. Sorry, I was trying to find the raise my hand thing and I didn't. I'm going to say this very carefully, but a lack of knowledge about the writing of IEPs and the roles and responsibilities of case management is an area that needs shoring up even with teachers who come out from a traditional teacher preparation program. And in my personal experience, the teacher of the hearing impaired or the teacher of the visually impaired, it depended very much on the circumstances of the student as to who would more sensibly be the case manager for that student. So I'm not recalling the discussions about that they would act more as a related service provider, which they certainly can be, but it often can happen too that they're the only service provider for some students. And so in that case, they function as the case manager. So that's something to think about.
And I guess if the members of the committee would like a little bit more information on what we're talking about, there are many students with a hearing impairment or a vision impairment who do not have any other comorbid conditions. So they don't have a learning disability, they don't have another health impairment, they may not have, well, for the vision impaired students, they may not have a speech language impairment. We may not have, there may not be autism or an intellectual disability or an emotional disability involved. Because for any of those students that have any of those eligibilities I just mentioned, they would have a special education teacher as their case manager. And then the teacher of the hearing impaired or the teacher of the vision impaired would then be, would add on to the IEP. But the responsibility for that IEP, for taking the student and throughout the evaluation process would be on that special education teacher. But we still have quite a few students who just have a standalone hearing impairment or vision impairment who don't have any of those other eligibilities, and who then now the teacher of the vision impaired, the teacher of the hearing impaired does do all of that case management and the IEP development, gathering all the information and the coordination of those services. So what we're saying is any teacher who came through this and who has this endorsement, who was general ed and not special education, they would not have even had instruction on any level about the IEPs and that information and all that goes into providing free, appropriate public education and how to gather the information. So that means that there would have to be a special education teacher assigned to those students to do all that case management. And in the field, as I've had discussions with my field of special education directors, we feel that that's just something we'll have to manage and live with if we have those teachers that have that endorsement. Because the scarcity, the paucity, lack of staff that's available out there is just, we're just going to need to mitigate that. Anybody have any questions for me? I see Betsy.
Yeah, I just have a comment, and that is, well, comment question, but I understand what you're saying, and I'm wondering how that can be communicated so everyone in the field understands that if you have that case where the teacher comes through the program and needs to be a related service, that the school, at the school level, they understand that as well. So they may, you know, if I'm a, you know, an administrator in a small school somewhere else and haven't been a part of discussion, and I get an application, I'm going to be really excited, and then not knowing exactly where that level of understanding of that special ed law policies, you know, compliance documents. So I don't know where it could go or how it could go, but I think that would need to be communicated.
Mary, thank you for raising your hand if you have a response.
Thank you. So I'm trying to recall, we did have a discussion about the certainty or very likely possibility that a gen ed teacher seeking this endorsement would be missing some of the foundational things. And we talked about special ed law, policies, and procedures. And I feel like that language is in there somewhere, but I cannot recall where.
Member Dunmore?
Thank you, Chairman Peasley. I would have the same concerns that Betsy does. I mean, typically a hiring administrator sees an endorsement and assumes that that endorsement means that that teacher can do everything related to that, the title of that endorsement. And so I think it would be difficult. I'm not sure what the right mechanism is, but I think people would assume in general that this person could be a case manager, they have the endorsement. So I'm not sure how we would need to communicate that, or whether there would need to be some special note on the certificate itself or something. I don't know. I just think that would be problematic.
Right. Bruce, thank you. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, members of the committee. So under my advisement here with Maura, if we look at the endorsement language that's proposed under CI on both of them, we have methods for teaching students with disabilities. And under D, VII, I probably do the math there, 7. We have methods for teaching students who are deaf or hard of hearing with multiple disabilities, and I think it's likewise visual impairments on the other one. It seems like there was some intent different between those two methods courses. I'd have to have Oren and Mary weigh in on that. However, if it's as stated, that's almost to be a double up. And so what we did on the prior endorsements, mild, moderate, severe endorsements, which had a lighter casework load just in general. However, they had, how we addressed it, I think through discussion last time, is we had a bullet called Special Education Assessment and Individualized Education Program Planning. And so that was part of the 6 semester hours on top. And so I think the thought was is that those kind of got at the law and the program planning components. And so, you know, that would just be pointing out alignment with the earlier endorsements, that's how that was addressed.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Oren, thank you.
I guess these are comments. So we do have the kind of piggybacking off of what Bruce just said, under D3, there is the assessment of students who are deaf and hard of hearing. So is that an area maybe where we can add to it using the verbiage that was in the other endorsement? In regards to the differentiation between, teaching students who are deaf and hard of hearing, and then teaching students who are deaf and hard of hearing with multiple disabilities, or who have visual impairments with multiple disabilities, that's important. I would argue that that's important, especially under VI. The possibility of getting a student with a visual impairment as well as other disabilities is high. And so just training a teacher on how to work with a child with visual impairments is probably not going to be adequate. And I would say the same thing with HI. I mean, you have again, trying to think of my wording, you have a higher chance of possibly just having a student who just has a hearing impairment. But again, the possibility of that child having other disabilities is high. And it's different than, I don't want to say just a hearing impairment or a visual impairment, but I would feel strongly that those two should be differentiated, and that we're talking about a completely separate child, you would approach it differently, being on if the child only has a VI or HI situation compared to if there's multiple disabilities.
Thank you, Oren. Yes, it is exceptionally different. And assessing students and with these disabilities, assessment and methodology are absolutely crucial in how teachers work with the students. And so that is the day-to-day, that's the nuts and bolts of what teachers do instructionally with students. But then this other piece, all of the moving parts, no, they're not moving, actually they're static and deep, but exceptionally detailed and individualized parts of that IEP is a separate level of knowledge and information. So that teachers have, that's not included in these endorsement paths. So with those teachers that already have a special education certificate, they've already gone through all of that instruction, whether it's discrete classes. We don't have too many discrete classes on the IEPs anymore, but it's just knowledge that's embedded throughout all of the coursework of pre-service or graduate level teachers. Okay, how about any other comments? I don't want to put anybody on the spot. Marisol, Member Garcia, what have you heard? Have you heard anything from your constituents?
I think it goes back to the survey that there's just, an inability to fill positions. And so other teachers are having to help carry the load, and they don't feel comfortable, nor do they feel prepared to do so. And I think it goes back to, and we've talked about this, it's just a Pandora's box once we start opening it. But I think it is valuable to start with these students because they are the most vulnerable, and the FAPE being something that we are all dealing with right now. So I appreciate the survey. I think that it is really good data for us to be conscientious of as we move forward, and the impacts that it has on the system as a whole.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Member Horn, what have your thoughts been? You've been quiet on this issue.
I know, that surprised you, didn't it?
But I needed to hear your thoughts.
I appreciate the survey, and I really agree with what Marisol has said. We do not have that particular program, but what Bruce has submitted does make sense. If I did appreciate the statement that Oren made about adding something, but I didn't quite get all of it. So that might be something that we would consider. I don't, I want it to go forward with something that we can all agree on.
Thank you. Oren, could you elaborate a little bit more on what you were thinking and where that could go?
Sure. So when Bruce was discussing the other endorsement, he mentioned that there was a line in which it discussed assessment, and then Bruce, I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was assessment, and then something else was added to that sentence in which he said would imply some of these items that we're discussing. And so if that worked for the other endorsement, do we just learn from that and take that same sentence? And Bruce, I didn't write it down, so I'm gonna have to ask you to repeat it. And I don't know, like, how hard is it to add a number 9 where we say there's 15 hours of coursework, which must include the following, and would that be 5, 6, 7, 8? There's an 8 that we add that discusses things like the IEP and special education law. That seems simple, but this is really my first time dabbling in endorsements and certifications, so I don't know if it's as easily said as done.
As an adjunct instructor and a teacher, special education teacher preparation program, adding that in under 15 hours, that information under 15 hours would not be, it wouldn't be valid. It just wouldn't make sense. That knowledge is exceptionally extensive, and I would not want anything to dilute or take away from what we've already got with the methodology. That would be my concern. Oren?
And understandable. The only other comment I have is, at ASDB, every one of our teachers is a certified teacher. They understand special education. Annually, we still go over things like the IEP, the MET, compliance, what are good goals. So I would hope that every school district in Arizona does the same thing, that they're not just assuming that because their teachers received a course or 2 on it, that they're masters on it, that it's something that you continually should be looking at. So it's not just when ADE comes in, to see if you're compliant or not, but that IEPs are important and that you're continually making sure that that everybody understands that and are writing IEPs and adhering to them to the level that they deserve. So I guess what I'm saying is a class on it's important, but I also hope that every district in Arizona continues to train their staff on it and to monitor the goals that are being written and the procedures that are being in place to ensure that you're being compliant, not for ADE, but for the child, the parent, and the educators.
Thank you for your comments. I think we're not talking about training, we're talking about individuals, teachers who have or do not have the necessary background to have capacity to write IEPs. Training, ongoing professional development is, absolutely, we certainly do that in our districts and our schools. But for somebody who has no training and no background, there's not professional development for that. So I think that's all I'd like to say on that point. I saw a hand. Was that Bruce? Mr. DePlante, did you have your hand up?
Madam Chair, members, so just a couple of reminders that the way this language is written, you can't or you shouldn't take C1 and say that's a 3 credit hour class, and C2
Correct.
And that's another 3 credit hour class. These are topics embedded in courses, and you have the 15-hour block, but you also have what's in C is a 6-hour block. So it's the 6 plus the 15. And so again, that language that was included in the other endorsements in that 6-hour block. And again, we're kind of targeting the methods for teaching students with disabilities, which is kind of a general seems like a general topic, kind of all kids with disabilities. The language in the other endorsements is coursework to include special education assessment and individualized education program planning. And so that by including that maybe in the methods for teaching with students and disabilities and continuing or replacing that one, because there's multiple methods courses underneath. I don't, you know, dangerous to suggest that with all the work that's been in, but if we include that language, then that topic would be required in their coursework, and the cert desk would have to evaluate and get course descriptions and the like to make sure that they've had that training. And so that's what I wanted to add.
Okay, thank you. Member Demler, go ahead.
Sorry. Thank you, Chairman Peasley. I just want to make sure that I'm clear on this. Were you saying previously that with this endorsement added to a standard early childhood, elementary, middle grades, or secondary, that someone would not be allowed to be a case manager, or you wouldn't recommend it?
Thank you for clarifying. We would not recommend that as special education administrators, because that, based on the information here and the coursework that would be developed, that individual would not have knowledge of the components of and the elements and the FAPE requirements of writing an IEP. So again, that comes down into, you get somebody like this, you hire them, you evaluate their transcripts, their certificates, you talk with them, you find out what their skills are and where they would need to have additional support. Here I have a proposal, Catcher. I don't know if this is going to work or not, but we've got 2 recommendations that have been discussed today about amending the language. One just specifically on the vision would be to do a technical change to bring the proficiency in Braille to the ARS 15 requirement. Then under section 214, then there's also this discussion of adding information about the IEP under either C or D of both under both endorsements. And I guess I'd recommend it go under C, because right now D is exceptionally loaded with the methodology, the assessments, and the knowledge that these teachers need. So is that a possibility that we can adjourn for 10 or 15 minutes to give staff time to work this up and show us that new endorsement? I really feel that I'd like to get moving on this rather than have to come back another month. Is that a possibility? And then I'll throw it open to the committee members and see if they would support that.
Madam Chair, I'm gonna stall a little bit here because I think I noticed Bruce was consulting with Mara. I mean, I think for conforming the rule language to statute on Braille, I think maybe I would respectfully ask the committee to not ask staff to try to do that like in the next 15 minutes, if only because it's pretty clear if the committee wants it to conform to statute, you know, there's not much that we can do anyway. So I think we would probably ask that rather than having us try to draft something like that on the fly that conforms, that maybe you can just tack that onto a recommendation to the board that you want that Braille section to conform to statute. I mean, frankly, to be perfectly honest with you, Madam Chair, even if you didn't include that, I think we would, as board staff, probably undercut CAC's recommendation, because I don't think we would want to recommend to the board something that didn't comply with statute, even if our committee
Okay.
recommended it. So that's the first part of your recommendation. The technical recommendation, I think we would probably just ask that that's tacked on as an amendment to any recommendation. For the second part,
Okay.
I mean, I think maybe I would defer to Bruce on how I mean, I looked at the other endorsement that we adopted, and it is, you know, it's amounts to like 8 words. But I also am generally nervous about amending things on the fly, just because, you know, maybe there was something that we didn't foresee or contemplate. But I also, because Bruce and company have been working on this in so much more detail, I think I'd want his input before saying that that's possible or not, if that's okay.
Yes.
Madam Chair, members.
Bruce, are you ready for comments?
So I think that we could draft something, and maybe if Oren can stand the line and Mary, or we can connect in the back end with Teams, we can bounce that off of each other real quick. We have kind of conferred with Maura. We think it's a pretty easy draft. But if we had 15 minutes or so, we could probably draft it, and then also just vet it off of the stakeholders that were involved in the original draft. Make sure we're not messing with anything.
So if we were to do this, it would involve having to re-meet another month.
Madam Chair, I think I just heard Bruce say that they felt they could jump offline for 15 minutes and whip that together. If that's, I see them nodding. So I think that's what I heard. So if that's,
Okay.
if that's what, I think if committee members have time, I mean, we're still kind of within our, I think I promised members this would be about an hour and a half. So I think we still have some time here. So if committee members are still available, I think what I would probably ask is that we recess for 15 minutes. We come back at 10:45. I would ask Bruce, Oren and company, and whoever Bruce would like to maybe schedule something offline on Teams or what have you. And I think I would ask Melissa to just keep us live streaming, and maybe Melissa, I'll send you something that's just like a Word doc that says that we're currently on recess. And then I would just ask everybody to be muted and probably turn off your cameras too, just because if we're on recess and something happens, I don't want to, because we'll still be on live on YouTube. So Madam Chair, does that sound like a plan? I mean, I think that hits at what you were looking for.
That sounds planned. Can we see a thumbs up, either icon or do it to your cameras from the committee members? If we all agree, looks like everybody's in agreement. Okay, thank you. Then we'll just go ahead. We'll recess for 15 minutes and we'll reconvene at 10:45 to take a look at that revision. I thank everybody and we'll see you shortly.
Great. And everybody, just as a reminder, try to turn off your video right now, and I'll make sure I flag you down when we come back around 10:45. Okay,
Oh,
Madam
Catcher, are we getting close? Oh,
Yes, yep, we were thinking the same thing. I think we are probably ready to reconvene. So I think I would let me just do a quick quorum check here, and I'm just going to assume if your camera's on and you're looking at me, that means you're in attendance, and it does look like we have our quorum back, so we can reconvene from our recess and probably turn it over to Bruce to take a look at that draft that they whipped together.
okay, thank you. I still show that I still have this, that we're, there we go. All right, so we're back streaming again?
Yes, yep, Madam Chair, and actually, technically, we never stopped streaming, but yes, we're back, and so Bruce, you should be able to share your screen. Here we go. He's working on it. There we go.
All righty, so Madam Chair and members, we convened, and Mary and Oren joined me, and Maura, and we had a discussion on C1 in both versions of the endorsement, that is really duplicated down in D, and D in both
Yes.
of the versions of the endorsement has multiple methods listed there, and that actually when we would evaluate that, if they took one of the methods down from the D part, they would count for the CI part. So it really is kind of redundant, and so the consensus was to replace CI with special education law and individualized education program planning. And so that's demonstrated on your screen right now for the deaf and the hard of hearing. And then I'll scroll. And I've already sent this to Catcher, but it's also on the visual impairment with the same replacement, no other change.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That works for me and my groups. Any comments, any questions from the members? Head shakes, head nods. Member Demler? No questions?
No, I appreciate the quick
Okay.
change. I appreciate the work on that. I think that covers it.
Thank you so much. Yes, the quick work. Now, this is that knowledge that our ESS and certification teams have, that they are able to do something this quickly and look at it and see those differences and see where the information can fit. And I just so appreciate your expertise and your willingness to listen and work with us and work with the field. So I think at this point we could entertain then a motion, and I'll be happy to propose one. It's recommended that the Certification Advisory Committee recommend to the board opening proposed rule R72615.01 regarding special education endorsements for deaf, hard of hearing, and visually impaired endorsements, with the amendment to adjust the Braille proficiency verification to match the language in Arizona Revised Statute.
I second the motion.
Is there, somebody to make it? I just read it. So who wants to?
Well, then I'll make the motion, whichever one you need, Madam Peasley.
All right, Member Horn, thank you. Someone to second
This is Angel.
Motion?
I'll second. This is Angel.
Thank you. Thank you, Member Janice Pennell. And is there any further discussion? Anybody I can see? It's nice seeing everybody up there. No other discussion, no other requests. Then I'll go ahead and I will call for the vote. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Okay, thank you. Thank you very, very much, everyone, for your hard work on this. You're absolutely amazing. So on our last item of business then is future meeting dates and items for future, future agendas. Catcher?
Madam Chair, members, our next meeting date is scheduled for October 6th. Because we were able to knock this one out today, I don't think that we have anything currently scheduled for that, but we will be able to firm that up probably by near the end of September, and let you know. Try to give you a week's notice at the very least. Try to give you a little more notice. That's all we got.
Thank you very much. So when will this presentation go before the State Board of Education?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry, Madam Chair. The September 28th board meeting, our materials go out on or about September 15th, 16th, or 17th, depending on how good we are about putting materials together. And so we'll put that with that September board meeting. It'll have an update at the October board meeting, and all things going well, it will be closed at our December board meeting, which I believe is about the first or second week of December. And there's a public hearing.
Thank you for letting us know that, Catcher, because for our new members, that's the typical sequence. It's 3 months. First month to present, and then isn't there a hearing or a discussion at some point that also gets scheduled for this, to gather input from the community?
Yes, no sooner than 20 days after the board has opened rulemaking, we host a public hearing, which is just another opportunity for members of the public to provide comment. And the nice thing about going through CAC is that a lot of times Bruce and his team, as with this rule, do surveys. So, there's already some good vetting, and of course the committee itself. So usually by the time it gets to the board, there's not too many more public comments. And if they are, they're usually pretty similar to what the committee heard. And the board largely reacts the same as the committee does, though there can be some differences.
Yes, good, thank you. I just wanted to hear our new members to hear our process and how that process and how it happens. And then when we come back, we get updates from Catcher on what's past actions that have been taken. Are we current at this point with the actions that have been taken by the committee and the State Board of Education, Catcher?
Madam Chair, yes, I believe so. We've already talked about it a lot. I think the last actions that this committee considered were those endorsements, special ed endorsements that were the precursor to the items we considered today. So
right.
Yes, we are up to date. There were some, there were some certification actions in the spring immediately, at the commencement of COVID and closures that we quite frankly just did not have the time to convene CAC to consider, because Pearson was closing testing centers, and there were some emergency things that had to be taken. And those were temporary measures to get us through the pandemic, to get us over the hump. But yes, other than those two, I think we're caught up.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, certainly appreciate the work of as I said, of State Board of Education staff, certification, exceptional student services, and ASDB staff for all of that work that you have put in. You're an amazing and talented group of dedicated individuals, and we appreciate that work. If there's nothing else, then we can adjourn this meeting of the Certification Advisory Committee at 10:58. 2 minutes to spare. Thank you, everyone. Be safe, be careful, be well.
Same to you, Kim. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.